Hello and welcome to What's With Healthcare podcast today. We are three nurses who have a combined 90-year history of working and observing healthcare in action. We come together for every podcast and talk about a topic related to the healthcare system from our different perspectives we've had from working and experiencing it. We're here to share this knowledge and our perspectives, and we want to hear from everyone out there who's listening in. We want you to help us to learn more and grow more and talk and share. That's why we're coming to you every week. We acknowledge and pay respects to the lands and the waterways of the traditional Aboriginal families from where we're podcasting from. So those lands are the Yugara, Turrbal and Darumbal peoples, and always was and always will be Aboriginal lands. Hello, everyone, and welcome to 2023 What's With Healthcare podcast. This year, we wanted to take a bit of a different track, and we thought, well, what does healthcare workforce want to know more about? And so what we thought was, let's talk about our experiences with the different patients and families we've cared for who are having major health events, but let's take it from the head to the toes. So in similarly, like what we do when we actually do healthcare, we do head to toe health assessments. Let's look at head to toe health conditions. So we're going to do that. Unfortunately, the human body and human health conditions are massive, so we can't actually do everything. So we're going to talk about the things we've got experience with and what we noticed helped or inadvertently hindered patients and their families' care. So we're going to talk about our experiences, and that might resonate with you out there and go, I've never tried that before. I might give it a go, or no, I've tried that and I'll do it again. However it works for you out there as listeners. But in that as well, what we're going to do is we're always guided by you out there. So if you have a topic that you really want to know our opinion, what we're thinking, what's our experience with that, please drop us a line through our Facebook page, through Spotify, through YouTube, and go, hey guys, could you tell me your opinion and your experience with discrimination, for instance? That's a recent request. That's why I bring that one up. And we're going to do that in the next few weeks. So let us know, because we're really interested in what you want to hear more about. So that's how we'd like to work this year, and this is how we'd like to present to you guys. And hopefully that resonates and you enjoy this year of 2023 with Celeste, Isabel and I. So thanks for being here. Now we want to talk about in this episode, which is episode 9 for us, which we're pretty excited about. We can't believe we're here already. In our Head to Toe of Health series that we're going to be doing this year, we wanted to start with the brain, of course. And so what we wanted to talk about, what's important in healthcare and what's our experiences, particularly for us in traumatic brain injury care, because this is something that is massive. So, and it has some really big health outcomes for patients and families. So we really wanted to talk about this one the most. But I'm going to hand over to Celeste and Isabel, because I've already talked too much. And they're going to say hello and talk a little bit about that idea of acquired brain injury and what is it, first of all, just so that we can get people's brains on track with where we're going today.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Hi everyone, I'm Celeste, and I'll pick up where we're going with acquired brain injury is I'll start with the definition. So from the National Community Services Data Dictionary from the Institute of Health and Welfare, that an acquired brain injury is multiple disabilities arising from damage to the brain that is acquired after birth. It results in deterioration in cognitive, physical, emotional, or independent functioning. So it says acquired, and this is to eliminate all the different injuries that happen congenitally, like in birth or during development of the fetus. So broadly, the causes of acute brain injury take in trauma, stroke, tumour, infection, poisoning, hypoxia, and degenerative neurological diseases. So it's like our Parkinsonism and so forth. For the purpose of our podcast, we're going to address the trauma aspect, and then in our next podcast, we'll look at stroke. So just acknowledging that there are a number of other causes of acute brain injury. And if you would like further information, there's the Brain Injury Australia website has quite a lot of information there as well.
So with traumatic brain injury, the common, in the data when you look at what's going on with that and how they happen, the most common ways that they're happening is transport road accidents, falls is next, assaults, and then there is other events with consistent head knocks in sports, so that concussion syndrome type events as well. So that's some of what we were looking at when we wanted to give you the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. They do all our data here, and when we go in there and we have a look, and in some of the slides we're going to put up when we post this podcast, we'll have those links directly if you just want to tap on those and see the numbers and the data. And some interesting other facts about traumatic brain injury is that 3.7% of a cohort of people who suffer a traumatic brain injury will die within 2 years of an initial hospitalization. So that's a lot of people who are having a major sudden life event, who have that happen to them, and then the world is very different. So they were walking along in life and it was all good, and the world was working as it should for them, and then something changed dramatically. So that's pretty important to understand, and that suffering and that trauma that comes from that in our social emotional brain to the family, the grief, there's a lot going on there, and that's why this is a really important area that we wanted to talk about. So, and interestingly, 70% of the cohort that will have a traumatic brain injury are male, and 24% of that group will be young and aged 15 to 24. So can you see we're talking about a large cohort of young people who maybe think they're immortal, and who don't think about sudden differences, or they may be having at-risk lives, where they don't think that this could ever happen to them. So that's what we want to sort of focus on, and how hard that is. You can find out much more interesting stuff about these facts too. And I think that helps us. Well, it certainly helps me in healthcare when I understand how big this group of people is. And, when I see them in healthcare, they take so much of our energy and time, and, and we want to do it well because we can see how much suffering is going on. So I think it's important when we understand overall data, it helps us to realize how big a cohort of people these are. But I'm going to hand over to Isabel, because I know she's got experiences that she's seen personally, and I know she wants to get talking. So Isabel, tell us your experiences of this group.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Sue and Celeste. That was great and interesting, because I was listening to you and listening to the stats and the facts and everything. And that's so interesting, because that's what I've seen, on the streets when I was, working in the ambulances and going to, get to the scene when the accident happened, and just seeing, sometimes multiple victims. And when the car accident happens, and a lot of those are male, usually, even though people say that women don't drive very well. But let me tell you that I've been looking after a lot of male and young male, a lot of kids actually, and that's very sad, because after looking after them on the streets where the accident happened, taking them to the emergency department, and then seeing them again in the ICU, and seeing all the process And sometimes, these brain injuries can be very, very serious and, even fatal.
Mm.
Young people die because of this. So, yeah, that can be, as you were mentioning, so that can be a conversation that we need to have with family members as well, involve the whole family when we are looking after these patients. Yeah, also, not just for the people or the young people who have accidents, car accidents, but also, for other kind of traumatic brain injuries that can happen. I don't know, perhaps, somebody was working in a building and they didn't use the proper appropriate protection, and someone, had a fall. I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of those accidents as well.
And also, Isabel, some older people, when they fall in their own home and then they fall and they hit furniture with their heads and stuff as well. You would have seen those as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've seen a lot of those as well. Yeah. And yeah, so interesting. This is a very interesting topic, and also, a way to raise awareness as well for the patients, the families, for us as healthcare professionals as well, because sometimes if you work in let's say, a specialized area like renal or cardiovascular, and you don't really see these kind of patients very often, but sometimes, these patients end up with long-term consequences. Yeah. And then you see them, in these services where you are working, but you also need to, take into account all that baggage that the patients sometimes went through and, they carry with them. Yeah, and sometimes, having those conversations is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think that you raise a good point, is that, in healthcare, things are divided up, so I might not be working in a space where traumatic brain injury is something I see very often, but the impact of having someone who has had a traumatic brain injury, their ongoing care for many years after in our healthcare systems increases, because they may need more physiotherapy, they may need occupational therapy, they may need all of these different groups coming into their life now so they can learn to walk, eat, speak. There is a lot of multidisciplinary care that happens as an outcome of a traumatic brain injury. And it's exhausting for the patient and the family. They get fatigued. They get angry because the healthcare system doesn't make sense to them. So they'll come to appointments, and appointments have been not coming through properly, and then they get angry and they fire up at the person who's on the receiving end. And so I think it's a good time to sort of talk and understand the patient's point of view, I guess, and why they're getting really fatigued and worn out, but also from a healthcare workforce point of view of how in that Celeste's experience in ED and your experience on the front line there as well, is how how much energy you have to put into those people in those moments, and so if you've got someone at the start of your shift who's come in with a traumatic brain injury, brand new, and you've got to keep them safe and alive. And, if they've got intracranial swelling and they're cutting out circuitry in their brain and they're on the edge of death, that's exhausting on us, because we're trying to manage that as well as support the family's needs while that's going on. And then we get home at the end of the day, and we get home and we've still got maybe family needs to meet. We're exhausted, we're tired. And someone says to us who's not in healthcare, "How was your day?" And you go, "It was really hard and I'm really tired." And they're like, "Oh, what are we having for dinner?"
Yeah.
And you're like, "Great. That's awesome."
That's a great point, Sue, because I want to know your opinion on this, Celeste, because in the pre-hospital care, everything happens so quickly. And so you have this rush of adrenaline, doing, keeping the patient alive. Then I will hand over the patient to you, Celeste, in the ED. Then you keep that going, right? You hand over the patient back to me again in the ICU.
Yeah. So
So
I'll
I
stick
say
my
that
hand
in
up
the
and say,
ICU, yeah, I say that in the ICUs probably where the, I don't know, the stress is probably not the acute stress, but the chronic thing, because you have patients who've been there, I don't know, let's say a month, for example. I had a patient who was very young. He was 19 years old. He was in ICU. He was doing martial arts, jiu-jitsu, and he had a brain injury. And that was so devastating because he was a beautiful kid, and he at the end of the day, he was paralyzed, completely paralyzed. And, seeing that deterioration day by day, and seeing that at the beginning he was okay with his injury, but then because he also had like spinal injury, and seeing the deterioration in his soul, that was very terrible to see, because you could see day by day how he was, and the family and everyone. So that's where I'm going. Okay, seeing that in ICU as an ICU nurse, I feel like that can have also a different kind of impact. What do you think, Sue? Or Celeste?
I've seen working regionally, we do get a certain amount of the trauma patients, and some of them go, or traumatic brain injuries, they go to Brisbane or to the city if there's cares that can be done immediately that's going to help their outcomes. And at other times, depending on bed availability, then they stay with us and we see them through. So that experience there is a little bit more removed from ED in terms of that acute stress and action, but there's still a fair bit of action happening in ICU and trying to look after family. And often there's a great deal of family because these are young people quite often, and they have a lot of a big support system and everyone rallies. And so there's a lot to deal with, and I'm sure that anyone who works in this environment out there would resonate with this as well. And you are caring for the family as well as their loved one. And there's a lot going on. You're focusing on two things at once. And it is draining at the end of the day. And then in some ways it's a relief to chuck it out of your head and think about, what's for dinner? Can of baked beans. But I guess it would pile up over time if you didn't find a way to be able to put it in perspective. Journal. I find journaling really helps me to just work through what happened for the day and reflect.
Yeah.
And it also helps, things come up when you journal, don't they, that are, you think, oh, I didn't even know I had that in my head at the time. And it's like a stream of consciousness, and it really does help with processing and also seeing the opportunities and learning incidentals that came up and things that you noticed, but more subliminally about a family. And you see their strengths come to the fore, I think, when you're dealing with the family as well, and in how they process it.
Yeah, you make a really good point there, Celeste. I think that point about journaling, because I know I do a fair bit of work with education in particularly probably nurses more. I do general health workforce, but I get more nurses who come and talk about mentoring and when I'm working out there. And I get a lot of nurses who say, I reflect every time I drive home from work at the end of the day. And I just challenge them a little bit on that point, because when I'm driving home at the end of the day, I'm thinking and I'm having the first phases of rumination and checking my perspective on an event that happened at work that day, but I'm not really reflecting, because reflection happens when I sit and I actually look at different viewpoints of the day. So ruminating, the beginning of rumination and checking your perspective is a little bit different to reflective practice. And so And if I spend too much of my life ruminating, I'm not actually getting quality out of my thinking. I'm actually just validating my perspective and getting a bit of righteousness happening and, you know, developing.
You can stay in a loop with that too.
Oh, and you get caught in a loop and 2 years later, you're still thinking about the same event and you've moved nowhere. So that's where, yeah, good point. So I really like that you said that, Celeste, because yeah, we need to actually dissect sometimes. And you do notice those little things where you go, yeah, I probably would never, like personally for me, you know, I had an event once that was quite traumatic. A family, like it was a sudden, it was a motorbike accident, and it was a really tragic accident, and the young person died actually as a from that traumatic brain injury, and just it was really horrible because of the way the family, you know, the trauma and the suffering that the family were going through. And I, as a nurse, was trying to make them feel better about it. No, I couldn't. Like, bad stuff is happening for them. So why was I trying to make people feel better? And it's that thing. And sometimes in us in healthcare workforce, we want to fix stuff. We want people, we want to fix it. But this is at the beginning of a grief process, and grief takes as long as it takes. So they were in that first denial. They didn't want this. They don't want to be in this space. They didn't want this to be happening. They didn't want this reality, right? And here I am in this brand new wound for them, trying to just go, oh, look, you know, yeah, this is really hard, but you know, you'll come out the other side. Yeah, well, I'll never say that again to people. That's a pretty that's
yeah, I think we can all relate to an instance like that, Sue. We think, oh man,
yeah, absolutely.
Why did I say that? Like that.
I wonder, does it come back to our own discomfort in that moment and our inability to just step back? Like, it's so hard, isn't it, to not want to step into the silences or to try and soothe, because we're caring and want to try and do something.
Yeah, well, and that's and I think
what people want.
Celeste, for the new players, for the new players out there who are new to healthcare, you know, you sit in silence, just you know, give them a hug.
But it's hard. It's really, and some of us find it harder than others. And I know myself, I've had to practice that. And so I've had to sort of ease up and think, okay, I think we can all agree we could have done that better, and move and learn. And that's where the reflection piece comes in. And that's easing up on ourselves, that like, oh man, I wish I'd handled that differently. Okay, so that's what I've learned. But this was good. And that was all right, you know, just get the balance and then you can move forward. And you, like you're saying about rumination, we're not stuck in that pattern of thinking.
Yeah. And I think the other really great thing is when you see actually, so then on the other side of the coin, I've had really good deaths where, you know, and, you know, good and death are two words we don't use together often, but we should, because it's actually really possible. And, you know, and I think, Celeste, we were talking about this just casually the other day, for instance, and, you know, I've had patients who have fallen at home, generally older sort of patients who've fallen at home and had a big head knock, and, you know, and which has left their brain not being able to come out the other side, as my classic words were one time. So they have had basically brain death studies done to indicate that there was no longer activity that was conducive with life, which isn't that a terrible thing to have to go to a family and have that conversation with the family of, hello, you know, we've done brain death studies, and what we found is that unfortunately Bob's, you know, not got brain activity that's conducive with life any further. So we have to switch the equipment off now. So we wanted to bring that information to you to let you know and give you time to say goodbye. So how hard would that be if you're not a medical person, you're not out there in the healthcare world, you maybe are, you don't have an experience with hospital, and someone's having that conversation with you. I mean, I can't imagine it because I've been in healthcare my whole life, so I don't know what that would look like from a layman's point of view. But I reckon it'd be pretty hard. What do you reckon, girls?
Yeah.
I think it is hard. It is hard as a healthcare professional and also, as a family member. I feel like as a healthcare professional, we do have the responsibility to learn how to speak to the families well and do this well. If you don't know how to do it, try to learn how to do it, because those conversations and those words that you say to the family can be stuck there forever. So being kind and having compassion for family members, I think is key. And if you have those two things, you combine those two things, plus, if you need a little bit of training, do so, because you don't want your words to be detrimental for a family or for a person, forever, because those things people will remember. And sometimes they don't even remember, the physical pain, but they do carry on with the emotional pain that they experience in these kind of situations.
And just at that point, Isabel, I'm sure you guys would feel the same in your where you've worked, but the ICU teams are so good at having these conversations. Like, I just want to send a shout out to all the consultants that I work with, because they are really across it. Like, I've learned, I've taken tips as a nurse going into the family room to have a conversation with the family and just give an update and talk about where things are at. And it's really good open communication, opportunities to ask questions, and does it make sense? And it's so kind and so gentle. Hats off, guys. Keep it up.
But that's the thing, like, so that's where sometimes when you have those conversations, and I've been in those conversations, where then a family member goes, yeah, look, Bob actually sort of was prepared for this because he knew he was getting older, and so he's actually got a list of his wishes that he wants to happen now. So can we start doing that now? And then you sit there and you're going, oh man, this is awesome. Like,
so proactive.
Yeah, like, so they hand over the list of Bob's wishes, and then now we're able to meet Bob's needs. And it is just, it's great for them because they feel they're still advocating for Bob, and which is their loved one. And we feel good because we're meeting someone's, wishes on their terms. And it's this great coming together. And it's when you see beautiful healthcare happen, it just all comes together and everybody's working for the common good to meet those needs. And I don't know, I love it and that's why we call it a good death, because everyone's on the same page. Everyone's doing what needs to be done to get the best outcome. And I don't know, it's those days when you go home from work. Yeah, someone died, but you know what? You feel like $1 million because you did what was wanted. And I don't know. I'm getting warm fuzzies talking about it because I'm remembering, and I know I learned so much from those experiences. You guys, you got that too?
That's advocacy in action.
Yes. So you've had something similar with those. What other things have you noticed when things, go well from a traumatic brain injury? What did you notice were maybe some of the key things that happened there?
Yeah, so one thing that I've noticed is, carrying on from Sue, when you're talking about people having a good death, it's arisen from having conversations, positive conversations about how you want the end of your life to be. Are there particular rituals? Is there some things that are deal breakers that you would never want? Some people say, I'd never want to be on a breathing machine, or I never want, these different wishes, and talk about why, so that, family know. And it's very empowering. It's a little confronting because our society really doesn't see death as part of life, which it is. Like, none of us are getting out of here alive. So, it can be a really positive and empowering thing when your family know what you want, how you wanted to live your life. And I think there's a flow-on effect that when we say what we like and what we want, then it gets other people thinking about, I haven't really thought about that. I really yeah, I really want this, or it might be a song you really want at your funeral, or it might be other things, how you want your body to be cared for at the end of life. But they're really important conversations, and I think they're the people that we see, like as your example a moment ago, Sue, about, like the family knew what they wanted, and they were proactive in seeking how to put that into action. And even organ donation, some families are really on the front foot before we've even got to that step, wanting to know about what this is, because Dad always said this is what he wanted, or yeah, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's they're the positives.
If you relate to the things that we've been talking about in this podcast, please let us know in the comment section below. And if you like the podcast, please give it a like, and you can share it as well with your relatives, family members, friends, and whoever you feel can benefit from it. You can also follow us on Facebook, and we have a YouTube channel where you can also connect with us and let us know, what you think and your questions, and suggest some topics that we can talk about in future podcasts.
Thanks everyone for watching today. And if you want to know more information about traumatic brain injuries, look at the slide where we've got some links to some more organisations who've got material that might help you, might help some patients and families you're caring for. Thanks everyone.